Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host, Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, and join button if you'd like to become a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member and keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you would like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live, and there's also a PayPal, Patreon, crypto, and thanks button in the info box below the video. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the nature of Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected. And if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using sock accounts. You'll be warmly welcome back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel. So please share the show on Facebook and Twitter. Now we are joined by Refracted Curvature, 10th Man, Arwin, Neil, and a whole bunch of people in Discord. So welcome one and all.
Good morning, good morning.
Hey! Hey, good morning.
Good afternoon. It's good to have you all. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. So instead of focusing on housekeeping as we do typically at the beginning of the show, we're going to pick a housekeeping question between us. So I'm going to only give you a couple of choices to keep this fairly brief, this part of the show. And then we're going to cover that particular housekeeping question in terms of the fallacy use around that housekeeping question. This was a suggestion that came from our Discord server from the guy whose name changes quite frequently. Who was it that said this in Discord? Just so I can see your name flashing.
Cuddles.
Who was it?
Cuddles.
Cuddles.
Cuddles. Oh, is it Cuddles? Okay. You go by lots of different names, Cuddles. Fair enough. So Cuddles came up with this idea that we just cover a fallacy in a little bit more depth, mainly because they're used in daily life, not just in debate about the nature of Earth, although obviously we're a dab hand at talking about them in that context, so we may as well, so that hopefully the audience can take the information away and use it in their general day-to-day life when people are using these fallacies and they may not have appreciated it until we've gone through them. So we're either going to cover axial rotation or Earth curve. So is there any preference particularly which one we're going to cover? Any evidence of Earth curve or any evidence of axial rotation? That would be Earth spinning.
Let's do Earth curve.
Okay, so the fallacy we're going to cover is going to be the affirming the consequent, which is a formal logical fallacy, meaning it has form. And the form is if P, then Q, Q, therefore P. Now, we may expand on this at the end of the description to include the begging the question fallacy that typically is the P statement. However, we won't. We'll just cover the fallacy itself, which is if P, then Q, Q, therefore P. Now, the if P statement is the thing that you're trying to prove, and you're going to be affirming this by showing something not necessarily related to it occurring, and then saying that that occurrence is as a result of the P statement being true. So in the case of a sphere Earth, if the Earth is a sphere, then we will see Earth curve, is the P statement. Or, to make it more accurate, if the Earth is a sphere, we will see Earth curve at the horizon. So the Q statement is we see Earth curve at the horizon. So if Earth curve at the horizon. And then the Q statement again, well, we see Earth curve at the horizon. Therefore, Earth's a sphere. So if P, Earth a sphere, then Earth curve at the horizon's Q. Q, Earth curve at the horizon. Therefore, Earth's a sphere. So obviously we're going to, as I said before, whistle past the fact that assuming Earth's a sphere in the first instance is a begging the question fallacy, and just focus on the fact that they're claiming the proof of a sphere Earth is had by looking at the horizon. And then when you look at the horizon, you know Earth's a sphere. So it's an affirming the consequent fallacy. Anybody want to add anything to this before we maybe expand on it a little bit more? No? So the logic, the fallacy is that the one doesn't necessarily follow the other, which is to say that if Earth's a sphere, we'll have a physical geometric limitation to our view at 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet. And what do you know? There's a physical geometric limitation to our view at 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet. Therefore, Earth's a sphere. Well, the Q statement, i.e. physical limitation of an Earth curve, I'm assuming, at 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet, aka the curve maths, isn't indicative of a sphere Earth being the cause of that horizon. There's no other options explored. It's just affirming the consequent, affirming that your presumption of a sphere Earth being a cause for a horizon to block things in the distance is a reason to reassert that when you see it blocking things in the distance by assumption, it's caused by Earth being a sphere. Right, let's discuss this. Unless there's something I've missed in that. I don't think there is.
Yeah, I mean, you hear it all the time. They've already in their mind accepted that they're on the sphere, so they're already starting it without proving it first. I think it's the main point, right?
Well, I thought we'd move on to that at the end before we cover a bit more in discussion about affirming the consequent. But yes, we will get to that. Begging the question is the overall aspect that we're going to mainly focus on throughout all of these fallacy discussions.
So what we're saying is, if the Earth is if the Earth is curved, we will see examples of the horizon blocking things at a certain distance using the Earth curve calculator. Is that that's what we're saying? Is it?
Yeah, that's if P then Q. And in most discussions, the person formulating this fallacy won't necessarily formulate the conclusion. They'll leave that to you. I'm glad you've mentioned this. So what Wandek's just done is given half of the form. He said, if Earth's curving, then we'll see a blockage at the horizon based on the curve maths. End statement. Well, the conclusion that they want you to make for them is filling in the blanks of the rest of the fallacy, which is your opponent, i.e. me in this example, by example, me saying, so we do see a blockage at the horizon at the numbers in the curve maths, therefore Earth's a sphere. Oh, well, then I've lost the argument, therefore Earth's a sphere, right? Not recognising that the one doesn't necessarily follow the other. Earth being a sphere, and there being a limitation to your visual acuity at a certain distance, just to rephrase it, to hopefully jog-start some people's memories about what we're talking about here. Anyway, the one doesn't necessarily follow the other, so to just make it as a statement and then affirm the consequent and say because of the statement my pre-assumption in the P is true is the fallacy itself. Any more for any more? If not, we'll go on to begging the question itself.
Well, when affirming consequent fails, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say when the affirming consequent fails, though, you do get a modus tollens out of it.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to cover that? Not
yeah.
Q. Do you want to formulate the actual fallacy first, and then we'll cover that because it is definitely related.
If it's if P then Q, Q therefore P is affirming the consequent. Modus tollens is if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P.
Correct. So in modus tollens, which this is precisely where we should have gone if I'd have given this a bit more thought. Thank you, John, for being here. Very important that we cover this. So in my example, and in Wandek's example, we'll use Wandek's example without the full form, and then we'll add the form after. So if Earth is curving, then we'll see an obstruction effect at the horizon, a la the curve maths claim of it. No need for the affirming the consequent bit, which is the curve maths, therefore Earth a sphere. But if you take that logic and say, if Earth's curving and we look at the curve maths, that's the same as saying if Earth's a sphere radius 3959, then every distance to horizon can be no more than 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet. That's if P, then Q. Just in a much less concise but much more detailed manner. But then when that fails, i.e. if the horizon isn't in line with that statement, you've got not Q. So if Earth is a sphere, then you'll have this horizon at 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet, as claimed to be blocking boats and buildings in the curve maths. But it isn't blocking boats and buildings as per the distances set out for the physical geometry in the curve maths. Therefore, not P. not Earth a sphere, radius 3959. So the failure of a fallacy to come to fruition upon example will turn into a modus tollens, which is also a form of logic as opposed to logical fallacy. Anything else on this?
Well, I like to say from an explanatory way, it's obviously by using what John said and you just repeated, then what is causing the limitation? Well, it's our eyes, and they're using that to prove something else, but it doesn't prove something else. And so once the horizon is identified as Earth curve, and yet it's not where it's supposed to be, then what it was blocking? So it's going to go into, well, why is the thing?
No, it won't. And I'm glad you've said that. Very valid point in terms of a general discussion point. But as we're talking specifically about debate and fallacy, wrong. Not in what you said, that was correct, but the reasoning behind it was wrong, and I'll explain why. Once you have disproven somebody's basis of good logic, i.e. shown that it's fallacious, and formulated it as we have done with potentially an opponent's argument. So Earth a sphere, we'll see Earth curve at the horizon. We do see Earth curve at the horizon, therefore Earth a sphere. Once you take that apart and show its fallacious reasoning, it is not up to you to then explain what causes obstruction, in quotes, at the horizon. Or show that it isn't obstruction, because that would be a positive claim you're trying to prove. It isn't something. You disprove their assertion based on its fallacious logic. Once you have shown that their logic is flawed, their argument is void. Now, upon voiding someone else's argument, it is not your responsibility to provide proof positive for their assertion. Unless you are, in this instance, 10th has just done this, making a claim of your own. If you take it upon yourself to suddenly make an assertion about what the horizon is, regardless of if you know or not, then you're falling victim to them having reversed the burden of proof without even trying. Now, we may or may not get into reversing the burden of proof, but my point is that it's not up to you to provide anything after a claim fails. And if you're the one showing why and how it fails, it's still not up to you when they turn around and say, well, what does cause things to go over the... I don't care. It wasn't my claim. You claimed it was Earth curve, and it isn't. So beyond it not being Earth curve, based on the example you gave and the logic you gave, give me another example of it being Earth curve, as that's your claim. Now it's down to you to give a better example, one that isn't fallacious, one that is sound in logic and does prove we're on a sphere with a curve Earth for a horizon. Not for me to show how it's formed, because I'm not making any claims about that. Fascinating though it would be to discuss perspective.
Well, yes, but maybe I wasn't clear in what I was trying to do. Let's assume that they agree with you. Okay, so you've proven to me it's not Earth curve. Okay, so we're settled on that? Yeah, okay, it's not Earth curve. Do you know what is causing that obstruction? Any idea? Any guess? Because we just figured out it wasn't Earth curve, so that's out of the question.
So why? How will it benefit my life? Now I know it's not the prevalent Western worldview that the horizon is a physical obstruction, geometric in nature, blocking boats and buildings with a calculable value for how much they'll be blocked by it. Once we figure out that that is not the case, will it somehow benefit my life in any way, shape or form beyond the total revelation that the entire worldview I held for the majority of my life is a total lie? Beyond that, you think I should concern myself with what it actually is? I mean, that really doesn't concern me.
Well, in real life, it does, because in real life, the guy's saying, man, you just proved to me the Earth isn't curved. Man, thanks a lot. But now, what is that phenomenon that things disappear bottom up at sea? Have you done any research on that? Because it's obviously not Earth curve.
Obviously not Earth curve being the main point here, not the fascinating folly that may follow if you choose to pursue that vague special interest in horizons that aren't Earth curve.
Well, I wasn't going to go.
Can I say something?
Let me finish, if I may. No, I was going to say it's obviously a limitation of your eyes and the deck and the compression of light. It's obviously optical.
Right, so now you're open to me challenging you to demonstrate and prove that for no perceivable benefit. there's no positive claim of a flat Earth attached to you saying that there's a limitation to your view at the horizon caused by aperture size or angular limitations, diffraction, refraction, whatever it is that you, in your experience and knowledge, which may be vast, claim at this point. All you've done is open yourself up for me to challenge you to prove that, when it's not attached to a claim of a flat Earth at this point.
That's what I was going to say. You're still arguing about Earth curves or the horizon at that point.
It all depends if I sense the person's already admitted that it's not Earth curve and we don't live on the ball. That depends highly on that before you go on to anything else.
Okay. But hopefully the point's been laboured enough. Let's move on, unless anybody else wants to talk about affirming the consequent, the formal logical fallacy. If P, then Q, Q therefore P. If not, we'll move on to begging the question. I suppose there's a choice. Would you prefer to move on to begging the question as a whole, or use if P, then Q, Q therefore P in a different housekeeping question, i.e. axial rotation with the same form of logical fallacy? So what do you want to do? Talk about begging the question, or talk about affirming the consequent with axial rotation?
I want to hear begging the question.
I'd say do the axial rotation to get one more run at P then Q, then go to begging the question and do, because everything is begging the question at the end of the day.
I'll go with that. That was the most expansive we've got in the last 20 seconds. Okay, so the same example. So we're talking about affirming the consequent, the logical fallacy that is if P then Q, Q therefore P. In this example, we're going to have Earth turning as the example. So if Earth is turning is the P statement, and axial rotation at 15 degrees an hour drift in the stars will be the Q statement, just to keep it nice and simple. So if Earth is a sphere rotating, then I will observe a deviation known as Coriolis effect in the stars at 15 degrees an hour. We do observe 15 degrees an hour of drift Coriolis effect because we're on a non-inertial turning reference frame beneath them. Therefore, Earth's a turning sphere. So that's if P, then Q, Q, therefore P. If P, Earth's sphere, then Q, stars moving, Coriolis effect. Coriolis effect in the stars, therefore Earth's sphere turning. Okie dokie. Does it logically follow that the assumption of us turning beneath a motion we observe in the stars proves that the motion in the stars is an example of us turning beneath them? No.
Surely you'd have to have another example of that, wouldn't you? Do you not have to have a couple of examples of
Well, that
this?
is their example. That's the point of this. So the point is, my example, right. Let's just, rather than put it in the third person, my example is that because we are on a turning platform that's sphere-shaped, we observe Coriolis deflection in the stars at 15 degrees an hour. That's Earth turning P, Coriolis deflection at 15 degrees in stars, Q. Do we observe 15 degrees an hour of deflection in the stars because we're on a turning reference frame? Yeah, we do. That's my example. It's fallacious because the one doesn't necessarily follow the other. So the Q statement is Coriolis effect. So the effect being described with the 15 degrees an hour deviation is only applicable if you're turning beneath things. So it only follows that you will observe that effect if your statement you're affirming, which is if Earth a turning reference frame, then we'll see an effect that's only applicable if we're turning. And we do see an effect that's only applicable if we're turning, therefore we're turning. Again, no other option explored. No other possible option other than Earth being a turning reference frame to cause that star movement to occur is a possibility in this form of logical fallacy. It's the only option, and when you see the second point being made, it proves the first. That's the way this form works. So to break it down beyond any example, you make a statement, true or otherwise, and then use something that you know you can demonstrate as proof of that statement. Then you show that you can show it happening and claim that that's proof of your original statement. So, for an example, if unicorns exist, then we will observe the stars moving because of them dancing through the skies at night. Do we see the stars moving in a circular fashion? Yeah, we definitely do, don't we? Yeah, you're all nodding. I can see you all nodding. Therefore, unicorns. dancing in the sky at night. My P statement, unicorns, dancing unicorns. My observable fact that I can show happening, and will show happening when I affirm the consequent, is stars moving. So I show you stars moving, and therefore unicorns, right?
Right. The unicorn is dragging a giant chariot behind it, and the stars are its wheel.
Exactly. And do we see the stars moving in a fashion because they're dragged by the chariot with unicorns on harnesses? Yes, we do. Therefore, unicorns are pulling the stars around in a circular fashion. Right, affirming the consequent. If P, then Q, Q therefore P. Now, unlike the Earth curve example, I can't say I can stop the stars to disprove the if P, then Q statement. Farcical though it is to make unicorns my example, likewise Earth turning as a non-inertial turning reference frame is farcical. I can't then say, well, if unicorns, therefore star rotation. But look, check it out. This is an example of no star rotation, therefore definitely not unicorns. Whereas with Earth curve, you can do that. You can show where it doesn't actually line up with an obstruction they're claiming and the geometry that they're claiming. When they say that we'll see Earth curve at a particular fixed geometry in the maths at radius 3959. Stars won't be stopped, unlike horizons moving, which do with the weather. The stars will always do what they do. Horizons tend to move around quite a lot and have no fixed location. But they need to have a fixed location when they're claimed to be a hill in the way of stuff. Horizons, that is. So it's not transposable into the modus tollens example that was given by John very eloquently earlier. But it is still another example of if P then Q, Q therefore P, with if Earth sphere turning as a non-inertial reference frame, then star rotation, Coriolis effect at 15 degrees an hour, and Coriolis effect at 15 degrees an hour, check out that star rotation, therefore Earth a non-inertial turning reference frame.
Wow, and this is what the Western world have been told the reason why the Earth is a globe, and it seems like most of the people haven't even challenged this statement.
By the way, I have an expansion on the unicorn star wheel theory, right? The stars are not the wheel, they're actually the nails on the wheel that are reflecting light to us, right? So we're seeing like glimmers of nails, and they are on the wheel. They're holding the wheel of the heavens together, and the unicorn is pulling it.
And the light's the wheel, right?
Well, the stars are the nails on the wheel. Right. They're reflecting light.
Right, that's what I mean. Okay. Therefore, do we see those nails of a wheel in the sky moving? Yeah, we definitely do, don't we, Arwin?
Indeed.
Therefore, chariots and unicorns. Obviously.
I mean, it's not that far off Egyptian cosmology. So.
There would be a way to falsify that claim, right? I mean, the stars are supposedly turning because we're on a spinning platform.
Well, there's one way to prove it.
Simply,
you have to get up there and remove one of the nails.
Hold on, Chocolate's halfway there to a modus tollens. Go ahead, Chocolate.
Yeah, well, if the stars are moving because we're on a spinning platform, simply remove yourself from the platform, and stars should stop spinning. Does that happen?
No.
Good one, mate. Yeah.
Funny that.
Now let's just see. I think you've almost got this. So if we are rotating P, then we will see star rotation Q. Not Q. We don't stop the star rotation. That's not quite not Q, is it? But it's almost there. This just needs a tiny bit of spit and polish, Chocolate, and it's a modus tollens. I was wrong.
Yeah.
And
I know what you mean.
It's enough for me to... Hold on, I'm just going to concede and give you credit. It's enough for me to say I was wrong. When I said this couldn't be formulated into it, I hadn't considered how you could rephrase the Q slightly to get it to match up with the statement being disproven by just simply leaving the claim to be rotating reference frame. Then it can be turned into a modus tollens. Kudos.
Come on, John.
Hold on. What if when you leave it, you're still rotating, even though you left the surface?
But that doesn't fall in line with if P then Q in the first instance, which is the claim that we're going to observe Coriolis because Earth's turning. So if you then say, well,
no, you're sorry, but you're even though you're not on it, you're still rotating with it.
God.
Well, are you okay? Did you have a bad breakfast?
No. I'm trying to figure out how he's trying to get around to the formulation of if it got put into a modus tollens, how your typical anti-flat Earth response is that you're still turning, but you're still seeing the deviation, which means that you're still a part of the non-inertial turning reference frame. Now, in that example, and specifically when you've focused on getting it into a form of logic, i.e. modus tollens, you can't have any rough edges because it fails on its arse the moment somebody inserts a get out that hasn't got me in the modus tollens saying, yeah, but Neil deGrasse Tyson says we're turning underneath footballs, and snipers say we're turning under bullets, right? Once that's inserted into the debate, it all makes sense and their arguments overcome. But you don't need that. What you want is a self-contained logical consistency, yeah, that doesn't have that possible. Well, the way that's done is by phrasing the Q statement in such a manner that it has the ability to remove yourself from the platform and still be the same statement when you show that not turning on the rotating claimed to be platform of Earth as a sphere at 15 degrees an hour doesn't induce the effect you would expect by leaving the platform, i.e. you don't stop the stars. So the not Q statement works, you don't stop the stars, but how do you have the Q statement work without that point that the guy's just made, undoing the modus tollens on its arse pretty quickly? Like I say, it needs some bit of polish, but it's pretty damn good, and it's enough for me to concede that there's definitely a modus tollens in there.
No, I mean,
well, logically, if you're getting off the platform or the non-inertial reference frame, the spinning Earth, and supposedly you're still spinning with it, then why make and that's still causing the stars to move, then why make the claim that they're moving because you're on the spinning platform?
Because you're still on it.
If you're still just wasting time.
This is Earth and atmosphere moving together. Now, in this case of the stars, that's the only example that it works with. It's only because I've got local examples that I can take it away from them. So you can still have a Coriolis deflection with a mixture of Globiolus effect and first law of thermodynamics violations and Earth and atmosphere moving as one. Because Earth and atmosphere moving as one doesn't affect the fixed inertial reference frame that the stars are in. So that guy is right in that example. It's not a great argument point for the Globers if they have their ass ripped through their throats regularly on that point, but it is when you're trying to formulate a modus tollens out of it. It's critical that those sorts of rough edges are polished out. Anyway,
yeah, but
I have modus tollens.
Go on, John.
I was just going to say, if Earth is a non-inertial turning reference frame, then it will have a radial value. Earth does not have a radial value. Therefore, it's not a non-inertial turning reference frame.
Perfect segue to begging the question. Okay, so most of these fallacies, when used in debate about a globe, start with the presupposition of a globe being in existence in the first instance. Like, comparatively, me just assuming that we do have unicorns. I mean, in my example, I've got unicorns, and Arwin's example's got unicorns. We're talking about them. We all know what the word means, so we must have unicorns. We're all on the same page here, right? We all start this next stint of discussion with us all understanding and knowing that unicorns do exist. We are all in agreement, are we not?
We are starting a new convention, that's correct.
Yep.
So we all agree unicorns are real. For when I next give an example of if unicorns are real, I'll show an example that proves they're real. Because we're already starting with the assumption that they are, aren't we?
Yep.
That's correct.
So if we are on a sphere, Earth, with a curved surface and a radius of 3959, we're all cool with just starting this next discussion with us being on a sphere in the example, right? If Earth's a sphere, then we'll see Earth curve at the horizon, for example. So we're all cool. We're just going to start assuming we're on a sphere to make the example of being on a sphere. Is that okay? Let's change tact. That's not okay. So it's not okay for me to start an example of unicorns being real by telling you that unicorns are real and getting you to accept that unicorns are real for me to example how the unicorns that are real are moving the stars. Or assuming that Earth is a sphere to then give you an example how if Earth is a sphere, then we'll see Earth curve, sphere, horizon. Because we've already assumed we're on a sphere. So this is called begging the question. That's pretty concise. I don't think I can make it any more concise than that. Anybody, feel free to open that up because that's as concise as I can make it.
I just want to say it's essential because you hear that term begging the question everywhere, but it's not begging the question. Okay,
I'll cover that first. So colloquially, people misuse the term because they don't understand English. So I'll give you an example. A guy called Vehicle Virgins does car reviews, and he misuses this wording all the time when he's talking about a particular car. So if they've left out a switch, for example, let's say they've left out a bonnet release catch in favour of screwing the damn thing down. When he points that out to his audience, he'll say, well, that begs the question, how do you get in if you're on the side of the road? That's not begging the question. That raises the question. It doesn't beg the question. Begging the question is the fallacy I just detailed where you assume your outcome, as opposed to raising a question of how you're going to get into your bonnet if you haven't got a release catch.
I heard Owen Schroyer say exactly the same thing yesterday. He likes to say that now too. Oh, it definitely begs the question. No, it doesn't. That's not what that means.
Yeah, raises
Afternoon, guys.
Hey, Adam.
How can you beg the question? I've not even asked a question.
Okay.
I knew you were coming up with that.
Calm down, Jim.
Let's just cover that. So the question that's being asked is the assumption of the thing you're trying to prove. That should be a question. Is Earth sphere-shaped? Is the question. Well, in not answering the question and making sure that everybody agrees with me before we even discuss this subject of if Earth is a sphere or not, that is the question. I'll make my statement that Earth is a sphere, radius 3959, and because Earth's a sphere, radius 3959, the horizon blocks boats and buildings. So it starts with the very premise that you should be asking a question about rather than stating as an implicit fact assumed in the first instance. That's why it's called begging the question. Because rather than actually querying whether or not Earth's a sphere, we're just going to assume it. We're going to beg that's true. It's the begging of the question, hence the terminology. We're going to be assuming it rather than asking it. We just beg that question.
Right, so this colloquial use of begging the question is a malformation. What they should be saying, what they're probably implying is it begs to be questioned, not the question.
Yes, that's an equally good phraseology rather than raises the question. Say that again, Arwen.
It begs to be questioned would be a better way to say it.
It begs to be questioned. Maybe. It's too close in terminology, but yes, it's equally correct English-wise, I suspect, although I haven't checked. But yeah, that sounds right grammatically. Okay,
right, because they're saying it because they are like about something that is said, like, we need to question that, like, that seems blatantly wrong. So it begs to be questioned. It's not begging the question.
Yeah, it leaves us with a question.
It requires inquiry.
Yeah, it requires inquiry. It leaves us with a question of X, Y, and Z. So yeah, it's just not the fallacy of begging the question. Either way, the question being begged in this instance is a sphere Earth, and whether or not we have one, assumed in the first instance, to say, if Earth is a sphere, then we're going to see horizon blocking stuff. Well, if Earth's a sphere is your positive assertion that Earth's a sphere that I've got to accept before we move forward in this discussion, aka begging the question. Any more for any more?
I agree. All ballers are beggars.
All examples of a sphere Earth will always start with begging the question without exception.
Right. Begging the question is effectively assuming the outcome within the premise.
Correct.
That's what it is.
Go on, John.
Are we going to go into how they use a false dichotomy with kind of a begging the question, but both of the models they use in the false dichotomy are flat Earth models?
Sure.
We're going to go into that one.
Okay, so dichotomy is... Who wants to explain what a dichotomy is first?
A dichotomy is something either is or isn't.
A two-choice solution.
Also known as a false dilemma.
False dilemma, yeah.
It's presented that there are only two possible solutions, so it's a false. They could either be incorrect solutions or there could be more than two.
Yeah. So I think, thank you, Adam. What John's driving at is to say that to mask the assumption of the outcome of the thing that's being debated, i.e. Earth being a sphere, you can hide that fallacy under another fallacy. So a second layer, which is offering up two alternatives. One is the assumption of a sphere Earth, the question being begged thereof, and an alternative that you, their opponent, may or may not have actually claimed, which is a second model. So they position you on a pizza pie flying up through a sky vacuum with a boat falling over the edge of a circular disc, and they with their if Earth's a sphere radius 3959. Those are the two positions they'll present. Question you on your adherence to their second position they've voiced upon you, whilst declaring that the outcome of the proposition put to you for a model you haven't necessarily claimed has only one alternative, and if their example is shown to be correct, their alternative is the winner. In this example, the sphere Earth is the winner when offered up in false dichotomy. If Earth a sphere radius 3959 versus if Earth a pizza pie in a sky vacuum with boats falling off a disc.
That's the least important one of all.
The least?
The least
important one. Very good.
Well, the reason I bring that one up is because their false dichotomy is of two flat Earth models.
I knew that's where you were going. Can you expand on that, please?
Well, they'll say stellarium. They'll use stellarium as their model, which is a flat Earth model. It's just got the celestial sphere around you, but that's a flat Earth model. And then they'll hold that up against, say, that equidistant projection, azimuthal equidistant projection, and say, well, this one matches observation. The stellarium matches what I see better than yours, therefore mine's true. And then nobody's ever questioned why are they both flat Earth models?
Correct. So they'll hold up the azimuthal equidistant projection, which is North Pole centric, and say this is your flat Earth model. Now, true, if you were standing at the North Pole, that would be your perspective representation of the stars above you, and when translated into stellarium from your actual location, it's essentially doing the same thing, but projecting out the azimuthal equidistant projection with the stars above your location. So both are flat Earth models, but they'll say stellarium's a globe model. Well, this has come from the globe. And they'll say that your flat Earth model that you haven't necessarily claimed, azimuthal equidistant North Pole centric projection, they'll tell you that that's your model. And if you even squeeze a minor win out of that model for whatever reason that you might do so, because you've claimed it, they'll say that it's a globe projection also. They'll tell you that both models have come from a globe. That when you describe the azimuthal equidistant North Pole centric projection, that projection is a projection of a globe. That's what they'll tell you. Now, in reality,
that would be
both are used for navigation with elevation angle measurements off a flat plane. Both require a flat plane to function. Both are flat Earth models, but they're being held up in false dichotomy, which is John's point, with just a mere claim by fiat that it's a globe model when it isn't.
Right. When Globers say that's based off the globe model, that's projection, because that's actually what they base their globe model off. They just don't want to realize it.
Right.
It's a Phil B trick. Phil B does it all the time.
But before
they project the ground up onto the celestial sphere is how they make the globe. But the celestial sphere model is a flat Earth model.
I'll tell you right now, most normies are not ready to hear that their globe came from flat Earth elevation angles.
I've never
They're
read
not
it.
ready for that.
I
I've said
was-
it to a couple of them, and they look at me like I have 3 heads.
I wasn't ready for the way that John just phrased that. So up until now, I've described what John's just said, and I'll repeat it in a second, as them taking the ground that you're taking an angle from and saying that you're stood upon the arc of the tool, and therefore you're moving around the rotational basis, the circumference of that tool. When you see the star drop towards the horizon, it's you moving around the tool, therefore taking the flat plane that you've got the angle from, making it the spherical surface of the protractor or the sextant. Okay, that's my rather long-winded way of describing what John's just described as taking the flat plane that you're standing on and projecting it up to the sky. Wow, that was much more concise. And visually, I can picture that far easier than what I described as laying the world up on top of a protractor. That's rubbish. What you've just described, the projection of the flat plane, so let's describe it as a azimuthal equidistant projection from your location in America, and then projecting the ground that you've stood and can get angles from flat up onto the ceiling in a curved way. Well, that's what the globe is, isn't it? That was brilliant. I'm slightly taken aback by that, John. That was excellent. Nothing to do with fallacies. It was brilliant all the same.
I thought that my projection conclusion was also pretty dead on. They tell them, oh, that's our model. No, that's what you based your model off. That doesn't mean that it started off like that. It's the other way around. You're projecting, Globy.
Right.
Yeah,
Let's
you're
not get
great
confused.
to
Let's not... Just got to discern what that meant. When Darwin says projection, he means psychologically putting on your opponent what you are actually guilty of. Sort of Hillary Clinton
Right,
style.
Psychological projection, not the actual map projection.
Yeah,
that
that's why it needs clarity.
Confusing.
Because we're talking about projecting the surface of ground up onto a dome, and then you're talking about globers psychologically projecting their ill will onto you. And what they're doing in this instance, they're projecting the fact that they take a flat plane and project it up onto the sky in the curve of your perspective view and call that the sphere surface, the globe Earth. And you're saying when they do that, they project, psychologically, they're using a flat plane on a curved sky and tell you that you've taken your flat map from a curved surface. So they project the very thing they've done, which is hijack the flat plane and call it a curve, and tell you you've done it. That's what Arwin means by projection, and he's right.
They're psychologically projecting their map projecting scenario onto the flat earthers.
Yes.
Nathan, I put a slide in Master B. We covered this a week or two ago. And John, you can jump in and comment on this if this is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a quite complex way of showing it, but yes.
So here you've got the equatorial plane, and you get your angle from a flat baseline. Then it's projected up to the celestial sphere, and then from there it's re-projected back to the supposed sphere of the Earth, as you can see there.
Right. So you've got the elevation angle measurement from your position at the centre of this circle, which is a flat baseline. The only way to get these angles up to these stars. And that's how it's depicted in the first instance. That's the origins of all of these models. They're all taken from a flat plane. Your globe's a flat Earth. In case you hadn't picked up on that and you're a sphere believer watching right now. I think a lot of them are probably tuned out just through twitching. Anyway, so what Tent's describing is how it's then projected up into the curve of the tool. So what you've got here, going over the top of this flat plane, is essentially the arc of the projector that you're measuring the angle with. So if you take this star on the left, that's the angle. There's the flat baseline. There's you. That's your measurement of an angle, right? Well, the tool that you'd measure those angles through could be described as this dome shape over the top of you. You could put the degrees over the top of it, right? From 0 to 180. So this would be your tool. But then you project up the ground onto what was just an arc of the tool that you were measuring, giving you a perspective view of the stars over here, right? And then you say, that's the ground. And now we've got these new angles that don't work anymore off a curved surface that can't give you an angle. But that's the switcheroo. And where Arwin's saying, when they tell you that an azimuthal equidistant projection is actually a globe projection, it's like, no, bloody isn't. your globe was projected up from this flat surface. It's the only way you got angles to the stars. You couldn't do it off a curve. It doesn't give you an angle. But the tool and its curve has become your surface.
Yeah, can you go to the next slide?
Yep.
Okay, astronomical triangle. Combining the celestial sphere concept and the horizon system of coordinates, we derive a triangle on the surface of the celestial sphere known as the astronomical triangle. This triangle projected back to the Earth's surface is the navigational triangle. In practice, the terms astronomical and navigational as applied to triangles are synonymous. So basically, the picture is being described here. They take an angle off a flat horizontal coordinate system because it's flat, and then they project it to a celestial sphere, and then from there throw it back and create a fake sphere for the Earth.
It's like, it's like everybody's heard the terminology as above, so below, and they've hijacked that terminology because that's exactly what they've done. They've took the perspective angle of a dome above us, and brought it below and turned that into a globe Earth. So they've hijacked the terminology as above, so below.
Right. What do you think the symbol for masonry is? It's the square and the compass.
Yep.
They've hijacked the fact that we see a dome.
We see in a dome perspective, we have an arc, which let's just bring it back up on screen. Adam's absolutely correct. This dome represents your field of view, which is measurable with the arc of the tool. So that's not a dome over your head. That's the tool measurement. So you could put the end, like I said, 180, 0. That's what we're talking about when he says dome. We know what you mean, one deck, and Adam's just clarifying he's not having a dig. But carry on, Adam, sorry.
Okay.
No, that was it. It was just to say, just to recognize, it's important to recognize that even though that's how we're seeing it, or imagining it, remember, yeah, we're creating that dome in our mind, in our vision. Yeah, it's not there. It's just that same drone at a different distance, so it looks like it's doming. But we just got to remember that the angle means distance.
Next slide, please. Adam, comment on this next slide because this is how the eye works.
Oh, where did you get this? This is great.
I showed it last 2 weeks ago.
I don't remember seeing this.
Go on, Adam. I think you're more knowledgeable on this, but this is the way we see.
I've got nothing on screen.
Master B.
While the audience can see it, this is the dome that we've just described. So when I said you could draw the digits of the degrees, 90, 180, 0, well, this is exactly the same, but on a much smaller scale than I'd ever tried to describe it visually, but just as good. That's this. Not a dome over your heaven. That's what it is. It's just the arc of your vision from horizon to horizon. Doesn't mean there's a dome over you, and it's why the azimuthal equidistant projection is projected from wherever location you're at when you make these measurements. It's only relevant to your specific position. I mean, it's a feat of feat of genius how the azimuthal equidistant projection actually functions. Amazing. Anyway, this eye shows exactly that. There's your protractor, your compass, or whatever you want to call it. Effectively, the sextant in your eye.
I think the word you were looking for is cartography. It's an amazing feat of cartography.
That's the one I was looking for. It's an amazing feat of cartography. Map making.
When we're looking at the eye there, I just want to distinguish that when we talk about angles being distance, that is only in relation to celestial navigation. If we're dealing with terrestrial objects, other things come into play. But when we are dealing with celestial navigation, then an angle is a distance.
Well, I think it's interesting that we take the measurements off a flat plane. We then model it as a flat plane. And then you take each of the zenith points or GP positions from the ground and apply it to that model of a flat plane, but in the sky instead of on the ground. And you got yourself a globe.
Amazing. Isn't it amazing? I never ever anticipated getting to this stage in Flat Earth where I believe I've now got a comprehensive understanding of how the Earth was measured, how it was then turned into a sphere, and how that was then perpetrated upon the Western world. I can talk about it from start to finish with examples of how it's done and examples of how it's still in current use as a flat plane in modern day life. Earth is flat. There was one last fallacy that didn't quite get covered with one of the examples that John for refracted curvature brought up, which is the stereotyping fallacy. So the stereotyping fallacy is where an assumption is made based on your group affiliation. So in this instance, as a flat earther, in quotes, it would be automatically assumed in the example given earlier with a false dichotomy that you do obviously automatically believe in pizza pie Earth flying up through a sky vacuum at 9.8 meters per second, with a boat falling off the edge and water falling off the edge. You think that, don't you, flat earther? Well, that's because that's a stereotyping fallacy, i.e. the automatic assumption that you abide by whatever that is claimed to be the viewpoints of the group. Now, there's a rude awakening to stereotyping fallacies if you come here and debate us as a globe earther, and if you're a regular watcher of the show, you'll know that's the case. Well, where's the dome? Sorry, what dome? The dome over a flat Earth. Do you claim there's a dome over a flat Earth? No, you do. Do I? When did I claim that? Etc., etc. So stereotyping fallacy is the door that needs to be opened, or kicked opened for us, to get you into the false dichotomy of having two models, one that you definitely believe in as a flat earther and their model that is only being offered up in false dichotomy to mask the begging the question fallacy. Now there's all sorts of complex layers that fallacies can be presented in, and just diluting them down to the simplistic form with affirming the consequent, it isn't really applicable in real world scenarios. And I'll tell you why. Because while we've touched on this masking of a begging the question fallacy with a false dichotomy, yeah, which had to be employing a stereotyping fallacy in order for it to take place, the person that's doing this, number one, they don't necessarily know that they're committing multiple levels of fallacy, but they will. And they don't necessarily believe you when you pull apart their logical fallacy with reasoning. They'll normally just talk through you, so it's more difficult than just explaining to somebody how their reasoning is flawed when it's layered up so much, and half the time the fallacy hasn't been given its full form. So you've got to know the fallacy, you've got to know how it would be formed if it was to be formed, but they haven't. They've only given you half of it and kind of made you give the other half to make the conclusion for them. All of these different layers isn't something that we're going to expect any member of the audience just immediately pick up on. But I do feel we've had a success in terms of really breaking down affirming the consequent today, and the various aspects of other fallacies that go along with it, i.e. stereotyping, begging the question, false dichotomy, and I don't think that was it. I think that was it. Was that? And the actual logic of modus tollens once you rip apart a claim that's proved to be incorrect, even though it's made with logic that's flawed. Any other summaries?
Listening. They're not listening in chat. They're losing their mind.
Everything that the Globers do, is a proto-fallacy, because they've introduced the globe after they've taken the flat Earth angle measurements, after they've used the flat Earth model to project those up onto the sky. Then they introduce the proto-fallacy, where it must be a sphere. Even though nothing has given you the idea that it is a sphere from those things, that's when they interject that, and that's what corrupts their logic from then on out.
Yeah, and if anybody was to postulate that there's a shill amongst us because this very fallacy was heavily promoted by a character known as Proto-Thad, he literally was the sort of main person to come here at the very least to push that fallacy. So if someone was to say, that's no coincidence, I go, yeah, you're probably right. Shill.
Well, A fad is, in the Urban Dictionary, is a musical creature that leads one astray.
So a guy employing the proto-fallacy and leading people astray was called proto-fad. Just like rumpus being called the rumpus. A disturbance. That's what a rumpus is. Yeah. Like I say, total conspiratard way to end a very good show on fallacy. I didn't mean it. You don't have to take that too seriously. But it is just a funny coincidence that the proto-fallacy was employed by proto-fad, the screen name. Yes, we all agree. Amazing coincidence.
You may have to go over necessary antecedent with what I'm reading in YouTube chat. Oh my God, these people are lost.
Concerned yourself with the YouTube chat, have you? That's
I just jumped in for a second.
Nathan, you're just
barometers and put your hand in front of a fan. I told them go back to 2014. This is too advanced. See you later.
Nathan, you're just hung up on the angle still, aren't you? Huh?
You're just getting hung up on that flat Earth elevation angle we need to employ this proto-fallacy of using the opponent's point to then move on to the assertion that we are using a sphere when we've already used a flat Earth and proved it. Yeah. Maybe I just need to stop getting hung up on that angle.
By the way, let me just say something real quick. Yesterday, I'm doing a job, and this guy built a big, table. It's more like a stage, so you could work on carpet. And he had these little holes going throughout it, like an air hockey table. So you flick the switch, and it throws air up, and you're able to move the carpet around. So he said to me, there's a science behind this. And I said, well, it's not science, maybe technology. And he agreed. So I think most people agree that when they say science, they don't mean science. They've just been so indoctrinated by the word that they'll just say science when they mean technology.
Well, I was going to moan that was a terrible way to end the show, but it wasn't actually bad. You rounded it out okay, Neil. But yeah, with that, I'll say if you are watching this on either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley premiering streams, then stay tuned as there will be an after show to follow. Unfortunately, though, if you are watching this live, this is where we bid you farewell. So a huge, massive, enormous thank you to all of you smashed the super chat, liked, commented, shared, subscribed, hit the thanks button, the PayPal link, and all that good stuff. Once again, stay tuned if you're watching on either premiering stream. I've been Nathan Oakley. Another massive thank you to today's Discord and G+ panels, and I'll see you all in the next video.
What a lovely day!